What do you think of the current moment in terms of President Trump and Israel?
We have to look at track record always when it comes to talking about Israel, how you address the prime minister of Israel, the state of Israel. There's not a reason to put some of the rants that have been out there. It frightens the evangelical community in the United States when we see that, because if you put the MOU out there, the evangelical community is not going to be aware of all that's in the MOU, and they're not going to care so deeply about that as they are about President Trump's attitude toward Israel.
Welcome to the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. I am Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. Usually Pastor Doug is with me, but he is on the road, as you all know. He's been on the road, going around with his family and preaching the gospel of Israel, as it were, and talking to church communities all over America about his family's adventure, their journey to move to Israel that is upcoming. Now, we have a really important guest with us. It's Heather Johnston. I'll read her bio soon. I'll introduce you to her. She's a major figure in the Christian Zionist pro-Israel American space, and it's going to be a great conversation. But before we get to that, please make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast and that you are connected with us on social media, that you're following us on Facebook, and make sure you go over, if you're listening on audio, make sure you check us out on YouTube. If you've ever wanted to watch me and Doug, only a few months ago, we started uploading Shoulder to Shoulder to YouTube, and it's really taken off. Our last episode, I don't know if you call it going viral, but it's hit somewhere around 85,000 views last time I checked. It's really doing very well on YouTube, and that really shows that there's a real thirst for what we're doing here on the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast, where a pastor and a rabbi get to the heart of matters, of what matters to people of faith. And we're of course very grateful for our sponsor, Israel 365. Israel 365 News is the place you should go for news and analysis from Israel from a biblical perspective. And make sure to check out all the other offerings that Israel 365 has there. My columns are there. Pastor Doug also writes for Israel 365 News. Make sure you go there. Make sure you check out Israel 365 Action, where you really get a lot of my content, video content, and analysis about the political situation, and also action alerts of what you can do to help Israel as things come up. And remember to go over to theisraeltruthnetwork.org, theisraeltruthnetwork.org. That's a fairly new website. It was really inspired and initially sort of led by Charlie Kirk, my good friend Charlie, when he wrote that letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu giving advice about what Israel could do to retell it, to tell its story better. One of his major suggestions in that famous letter is to create a rapid response mechanism to respond to lies about Israel with well-sourced fact sheets and have an archive of information about Israel. And together with Charlie, under Charlie's guidance, working with some of Charlie's team, actually, together with people at Israel 365, we started building this, and we recently launched it. So go to theisraeltruthnetwork.org, theisraeltruthnetwork.org. Make sure to click the button in the top right, and then you'll get those those alerts, so that when there's a lie told about Israel in as real time as possible, rapid response, you will get all the ammunition you need to push back. Go to theisraeltruthnetwork.org. Now, before we get to our guest, I just want to comment on something that happened. Last week here in Israel, Ami Kozak, the comedian, and a lot of you know who Ami is. Ami, he does impressions, like he does these impressions of Tucker Carlson and impressions of Candace Owens and impressions of President Trump. And he's a lot of political comedy, but he's a fantastic comedian. He's also he's a very sharp thinker. If you go over to Israel 365 News YouTube channel, you'll see that about a week and a half ago, it was about a week and a half ago, I did an interview with Ami. That's up there. It's a fantastic conversation about what he's doing with his comedy. And Israel 365 sponsored a couple shows that he did in Israel when he was here last week. And one was in Jerusalem and one was in Tel Aviv. And because Israel 365 was sponsoring it, I attended both shows. They were great. I was worried it would be the same comedy both nights. It wasn't. It was fantastic. A lot of it was the same, but there was enough differences that even someone who watched the show twice was laughing. But I just wanted to bring up a serious point, which is that at one point when he decided to do his impersonation of President Trump, and he introduced that part of the act, and he asked the crowd, "So what do we think of President Trump?" And in Israel, you could expect, especially in a more conservative audience, which is who was at these events, you would expect there to be a standing ovation. You think about everything President Trump has done for Israel, There's really been no greater friend of Israel ever in the White House, moving the embassy and taking out Soleimani and everything that he did to restrict Iran in his first term and to restrict the Palestinian Authority, and by cutting off funding because they were funding terrorists, and everything we've done, everything he's done together with Israel against Iran, and just imagining the dystopia we'd be living in if Kamala Harris was in the White House. I mean, if you think about how grateful we have to be for President Trump, the fact that sometimes the moves that he makes make us scratch our head or even make us uncomfortable or even compromise our security because of his understanding of what's in America's best interest, and it's not the same as Israel's. I'm talking about this recent MOU with Iran and the ceasefire and the way this has all gone. There's a lot of Israelis, a lot of people in Israel who've kind of felt like, oh, he's turned on us. And that's why I wanted to highlight, because when Ami brought this up, there wasn't a standing ovation. There was a lot of discomfort in the room, some silence in the room. It's like people didn't want to cheer for President Trump. And I thought to myself, like, and this isn't coming from a place of like I'm defending President Trump's honor. It's more a matter of saying we have to have it. What it said to me was that there was a lack of clarity and level-headedness in our crowd, and it's not healthy. In the pro-Israel community, we tend to overreact. When President Trump does something we want, oh, he's Cyrus the Great, he's the greatest thing ever. The redemption is on the way. And then when he does something that we don't like, we're like, oh my gosh, he's betrayed us. He's turning against Israel. We have to keep a level head. We have to keep the big picture clear before us. Of course, God is on the throne, and the hearts of kings are in the hands of the Lord. That's what Scripture tells us, and that is true about President Trump. It's true about everyone in positions of power that affect us. But we have to be very level-headed about this. We see the Lebanon agreement that was also coming out of the Trump administration was a very positive move. The story is far from over, and I think that we should not lose our sense of gratitude for all the great things that President Trump has done for Israel, because there are currently some tensions and some disconnect between Israeli policy and American policy. That's just my little sermon for the audience, for this week. I'm gonna, without further ado, I'm gonna bring in our guest, but let me just pull up her bio. It's someone I've wanted to talk to for quite some time. She plays a very important role in the Christian Zionist movement. Heather Johnston is the founder and president of the U.S. Israel Education Association, which educates senior U.S. policymakers on Israel's strategic, security, and geopolitical landscape. For more than a decade, she has led congressional delegations to Israel for senior members of Congress and key committee staff. In Washington, she regularly briefs lawmakers and senior staff on Israel's strategic and security challenges. Heather also founded Israel's National Leadership Center in the city of Ariel, that's in Samaria, developed in close coordination with Israel's Ministry of Education. Since 2010, the center has trained more than 120,000 Israelis, including Jewish and Arab youth and all branches of the Israel Defense Forces. We're going to hear more about that in this conversation. With more than 25 years of experience working in and on Israel, Heather is a recognized authority on Jewish-Christian relations and modern Israel's biblical and historical context. She is the author of Uncommon Favor and a frequent speaker to policy, faith, and philanthropic audiences. She studied communications and journalism at Auburn University and earned a Master of Theology from Beeson Divinity School. I usually don't read the education, but I'm reading it because I love Beeson Divinity School. I've spoken there a couple of times. I have some friends who are on the faculty there, Grant Taylor, Mark Ginelet. I don't know if they listen to this podcast, and Jerry McDermott, who's been on this podcast, used to be there, used to have a senior position there. So I've been to Beeson a number of times. She lives in Birmingham, Alabama with her husband, Bruce. Together, they have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. And without further ado, Heather Johnston, welcome to the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast.
Great to be with you today.
So Heather, you heard my tee up where I was talking about President Trump and where things are now, and we're going to get into all of that. But just maybe you want to comment on that before we get into your personal story and letting our audience know who you are. What do you think of the current moment in terms of President Trump and Israel?
Well, I think you're very gratuitous, and I'm in agreement with you. We have to look at track record always. But I also have encouraged those around him just to lower the rhetoric when it comes to talking about Israel, how you address the prime minister of Israel, the state of Israel. There's not a reason to to put some of the rants that have been out there. It frightens, quite frankly, it frightens the evangelical community in the United States when we see that. Because if you put the MOU out there, the evangelical community is not going to be super, super aware of all that's in the MOU. And they're not going to care so deeply about that as they are about President Trump's attitude toward Israel. And when you start to see that shift for weeks at a time, that becomes concerning. So I completely agree with you. I just think there's problems with it. And so I think some of that's being addressed.
All right, that's fair enough, and we'll get into that more in a little bit. But I want the audience, the shoulder to shoulder audience, to get to know you and your important work. And it's actually amazing to me that. Although one very, very brief meeting, it was so brief that I had a vague idea of what you even looked like before you sent me your bio and your photo. But I know that we did meet once many, many years ago. But just your position in the Christian Zionist world and the work that I do with Christian Zionists, it's actually kind of amazing to me that this is the first time we're having a conversation. But so be it. Could you share with us? I just read your bio, so everyone knows what you do, more or less. But could you share from a personal level? There's not that many Christians who are devoting their lives the way you are to the U.S.-Israel relationship. What's the origin of that? Whether in terms of your upbringing, your theology, how did, or just the story? How did you get into this Israel space?
Yeah, well, it is quite a story, and it should encourage everybody, because I think that we are in such an extraordinary time in Israel's history that God made it very, very clear that in those days and at that time when I restore Israel, I am going to beckon to the Gentiles. I'm going to lift a banner to the nations, and they're going to carry you. And he did not stop with just a large sort of a casting out, a throwing out of that net, like I'm going to, draw, everybody to you. He also handpicks people. And I felt like we were handpicked to step into this journey for a lifetime. And we started 27 years ago. We got involved back in the 1990s when there was this mass aliyah of Jews coming in from the Soviet Union and really from around the world. And we began to kind of understand for the very first time modern Israel inside of the biblical history and prophecies up against the eternal covenant with Abraham. Rabbi Wolicki, I grew up, if you can imagine, in a Presbyterian church that held to a covenant theology and a real replacement supersessionism that really outdated Israel. Israel was on the outside. The church had completely replaced Israel in God's covenant and redemptive purposes. And so you can imagine growing up in that, but also growing up, I did, in a very Jewish community. So it was just such a surreal thing to finally understand and come to grips with that there was a modern Israel where prophecies were being fulfilled and that there was a role for the Gentiles to play in it. And that's really, really what governed our decision to step in at that time and to stay with it.
Well, Heather, so there's an elephant in the room that you just created right now, because on this podcast, we hear a lot of people's personal journey stories and how they got to where they are, especially in the Israel space. And you just mentioned that you were raised in a replacement theology, ironclad replacement theology, Presbyterian. We all know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. We talk about this topic a lot on this podcast. And then you said, but then as these events unfolded in the 90s, you were seeing the prophecy come to life. Now, usually people who are locked in on replacement theology are kind of blinded, or dare I say, have a veil when it comes to seeing the prophecies of Israel being fulfilled. It's almost that they're taught not to see it. And let me just put it a different way. There's a whole lot more Christians out there who didn't connect the dots and see those prophecies fulfilled. So where did the switch, what flipped the switch for you on Israel? Was it a visit to Israel? And why were you primed to see this correctly if you had been raised with replacement theology? Mm-hmm. There's a piece of the puzzle that you're not telling us here.
I understand. I like to create the elephant in the room. I understand there's a story that has to be told. And so I think it was two things. Two things happened. One, back in 1997, my husband and I did a 40-day fast. And it was really for the purpose of just drawing as close as we could to God to understand where our journey was taking us. We had J.H. Ranch here in California, this thousands of acres here in the Pacific Northwest. We were running small programs for parents and teens and teenagers, but we just knew there was more. And so
and at this point, it was unconnected to Israel. There was
totally unconnected.
It wasn't on your radar at all.
Replacement theology.
Okay.
And so we were in the course of that fast, inside the 30th day. I reached into the oven to get something out for our children to have for breakfast. And I saw a vision of Psalm 137, verse 4-6. Presbyterians don't typically see visions. I'm not sure that many people ever see visions, anybody, but I did.
The spirit-filled Presbyterian. Here we are.
It stays suspended before me, Psalm 137, verse 4-6. And I went to go look it up. And I knew God's presence was there with me. And it said, how can you sing the songs of the Lord while you're standing in a foreign land? If you forget Jerusalem, may your right hand forget its skill. May your tongue cling to the roof of your mouth if you forget her. If you don't keep Jerusalem, your chief joy. Now, of course, that passage is about the Jews in exile in Babylon, and that very, very famous verse that I've come to understand, Psalm 137, 4-6. But believe you me, I had not read that before with that intent. And so I wrote it down in my journal. I went before God and started praying into it and saying, I don't know what this means, because, I could only think of it in terms through the lens that Israel had nothing to do with any of this, that I was on some sort of a spiritual journey to, a higher Jerusalem or some sort of greater spiritual experience, sort of like Harriet Tubman when she was taking the slaves across the Mason-Dixon line. She kept saying, we're headed to Zion. And she really drew on the biblical narrative for her times. Well, that's kind of what people do. They replace Israel with themselves, and that's fine. I mean, it's okay to a certain degree. But then if you only ever do that, you miss Israel. So at that time, I didn't know, but someone very wonderful scholar came into our life and helped us understand modern Israel inside these biblical prophecies. And I would continue to wake up in the night, and this is what I'm trying to tell you. When I say that God is beckoning to the Gentiles, he is hand-holding with some of them. He handheld us by taking us to Isaiah, Ezekiel, opening up the world of the Old Testament prophecies that would be fulfilled in modern times. And I think that's really what grabbed us, was God's personal revelation to us by his Ruach HaKodesh as we went into the scriptures. And I think that's what changed everything. Secondly, we made a trip in 1997 to Israel. That's where we met Mayor Ron Nachman, and we set sail. He was the founding mayor of Samaria, really of the city of Ariel, which is the regional hub there. And we became very fast friends. We helped build their radio station, did a lot in that huge aliyah of Soviet Jews coming into Samaria, half the city of Ariel, Russian Jews. So that's where we got involved. It all began to make real sense. And I remember standing in the Russian Absorption Center. You'll love this story. And we were tired. We were jet lagged. It was the first trip to Israel. We were trying to take everything in. And there was a Russian choir singing there. And they were singing in Russian, and then they were singing in Hebrew. And that was enough to make you go to sleep. But the last song rang out, and it was in English, and it was "I Come from Alabama with a Banjo on My Knee." And I can assure you, I was the only person from Alabama
Susanna
sitting in that room that actually played the banjo. Foggy Mountain Breakdown and Orange Blossom Special, and Paul and Silas Prayed in Jail. And so that really, those types of things, and this is what I'm trying to tell you and your audience, God wants to speak to us. He wants to meet us personally on the issue of Israel. And that is what he did for Bruce and I. And that is how we set sail. And the following day, I was standing in the Jewish quarter outside of a store. And the storekeeper came out with a kippah on his head, and he handed me this ring. And he said, I feel like I'm supposed to give you this ring. And I'm like, well, I'd never seen this person in my entire life. And it was a Hebrew inscription. And he said, I just felt like I was supposed to walk outside my store and hand this to you. And I said, what does it say? And he said, how can you sing the songs of the Lord while you're standing in a foreign land?
Wow.
If you forget Jerusalem, may your right hand forget its skill, and may your tongue cling to the roof of your mouth if you forget her. If you don't keep Jerusalem, your chief joy. Well, I about slid down the wall. I kind of poked him to see if he was an angel, but no, he wasn't. It was just Moshe Kempinski, the shop owner.
I know Moshe.
And so you can imagine how these types of things sealed the fate for us to take Israel on for a lifetime.
Well, first of all, I would disagree with you. I think Moshe Kempinski is an angel, actually. But
from time to time.
That's amazing. So Heather, so there's different kinds of Israel activism out there. There's different kinds of things people do for Israel, and you really moved into this education space, but focusing on elected officials. So could you talk about that work? Talk about how you got into that, what that looks like.
Sure. Actually, we were involved in the city of Ariel, which is in Samaria. That takes us back to that important relationship that we had there. And I think that in building that relationship with the mayor of the city, he kept saying over and over again, where's the Congress? We never, ever, ever have a congressman ever come through one of the Jewish communities here in Samaria, which makes up 20% of the nation. So that was a motivation. And then I do understand how God works. And he began to lead us in that direction to start taking the senior leaders of Congress through the area called Judea and Samaria. So we were leading tours at the time. So it wasn't like we had not led tours. And it wasn't as if we had not led tours through Samaria and Judea. But I had not taken Congress before. So it was amazing. It was another real providential and sovereign act of God to bring me together with Erick Cantor, who was the majority leader of the Congress at that time. And by the way, he was the only congressman I had ever met. And we met each other, and I shoved a piece of paper across the table, and I said, if there was to be an advanced education trip for the senior members of Congress, I know AIPAC's leading freshmen, and we need to have those 101 trips. They are so vitally important, but you can be a congressman 20 years and never make it back to Israel. So if we can get the secondary ones, we certainly should take them through Judea and Samaria. For advanced education, they need to understand this area and the promises of God to Israel concerning that. They also need to understand the demographic realities and what the future is supposed to be. So we really worked together on that. And he looked at me and he said, I've been looking for somebody for 2 years that would lead advanced trips. And so we kind of shook hands over the table, and he began to populate our trips to Israel. So that's a little of how U.S. Israel Education Association began. And as a highlight to that, our very, very first trip, we took 5 chairmen on House Armed Services, and one of them kept coming up to me. His name was Doug Lamborn from Colorado, and he said, we need to go see this thing called the Iron Dome. Nobody had ever seen it before. Nobody had ever.
How long ago was this?
This was in 2011. So
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh dear, how am I going to take this first tour and get these members who hold the pocketbook, for missile defense? How am I going to get them to the Iron Dome? So I had to go approach the prime minister. And I just said, we're sitting across the table. And he said, so Heather, where are you taking everybody? And I said, well, we actually need to go see the Iron Dome. We need to go see the Iron Dome. And he kind of looked at me like, I can't believe you're asking me in front of everybody. But he turned to his national security advisor and he said, do you think there's a way sometime while they're here on this trip that we could declassify it so they could go see it? And by the next day, we were on a bus headed over into the Judean wilderness to go out and see the missile defense system that has changed and revolutionized the state of Israel today, the Iron Dome missile defense system. Well, everybody was mesmerized, absolutely blown away. So it took no motivation to get these 5 members back to D.C. They pulled 54 members of Congress together. We brought in the education, and within 2.5 months, they tripled the budget for Iron Dome from $230 230 million to 690 million. It was signed in the House, passed the House, Senate, and then was signed by President Obama, which set in motion getting Iron Dome around all of the population centers of Israel. To that point, it had only been on the borders, protecting little, these lopsided missiles that were coming in indiscriminately. But by a year and a half later, we were back in war, Israel was, with the crazy Hamas rulers and leaders, and they were lobbing missiles into the cities of Israel by then, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And thank God, by his sovereignty, that we got the Iron Dome missile defense collaboration started, then David Sling, and all of these have happened incrementally and on time.
Wow. The entire population of Israel owes you a great thank you. That's amazing. So you've continued doing these trips.
Thank Hashem.
Of course, every day, all day long. Of course. Well, thank you for being in the right place at the right time and stepping through the doors that the Lord opened in front of you on Israel's behalf. Heather, talk about the scale of what you've been doing in terms of elected officials, and if is it restricted to the federal level? Give us some of the texture of the work of the organization.
Well, I think our influence is wide and vast and varied, but I think and into the government is what I mean, and really into both of our governments. I think we have a role to play in the U.S.-Israel collaboration. That's what U.S.-Israel Education Association is doing, is really building a road into the future. So we're very, very entrepreneurial. We're looking out ahead of things. And I think our aim has really, really been to educate Congress, which I know it seems like they would have enough education. But as you get into it, you can really, really understand now the extreme importance that that elected officials into our Congress are being educated in the right way and with a real governorship and a real sense of understanding the biblical view of modern Israel inside the biblical history. Because if members of Congress understand what their role is, because there's a role for them to play, then it really begins to make sense that they help lead the way as it concerns the U.S.-Israel collaboration. So, yes, we're working with Congress where they are the balancing act to any U.S. administration. You never take your eyes off Congress. And they have played the iconic role in the world. The iconic role, let me just say it again, bar none. The U.S. Congress has played the iconic, steady role in the U.S.-Israel collaboration for the world. U.S. administrations have come and have gone and have done good things and bad things. It's been like this. The Congress has been the steady stream in the sea of adversity. So our focus has been there, but our influence, of course, has reached the White House.
Okay, so Heather, this brings us to a hot topic of the day, something we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and I think everyone in the Israel and U.S.-Israel relationship space has been concerned with, which is the disturbing trends in the younger generation on the American right and the American conservative world and the Republican, whatever you want to call it, in the Christian community as well, that the younger generation is less inclined towards support for Israel. I think sometimes the anti-Israel sentiment can be overstated. I say that as someone who attended, Turning Point USA events, and I was in regular touch with Charlie, and I had my finger on the pulse of that. So I think in some ways it's not as bad as people think, but there's certainly some disturbing signs there. We also know about some of the turning against Israel that's been happening within the Republican Party, even at the congressional level. There are more people at that level who are being elected or are already elected and are concerned that Israel is not such a popular topic. So in this environment, with everything we've been dealing with the media, with the podcasters, and the way support for Israel is, you've been on the front lines of this. Has it changed your conversations with members of Congress? Are you seeing the effects of those disturbing trends in your work on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think that there's definitely a shift toward, in some pockets of the Congress, and certainly on the Democratic side of our part of the party, to with a greater anti-Israel, sentiment. And I think it does affect the policies. I would just say that war has not been our best friend. A protracted war that is 2 years with, Hamas. Now we've moved into Iran, and with that steady diet of TikTok coming in for the next generation, this fast food diet that, Israel equals genocide. They have committed genocide. And that constant refrain has really, really impacted the situation for this next generation. And I think with Congress, that it's a time for those leaders that really know how to stand strong to do so. And I think they are. I think people are seeing through all of this, and they get more of the intel than the civilian population does. And that intel does inform those members of Congress that are standing with Israel to stand even stronger. And I think we're getting a lot of strength coming out of the Congress as it concerns that. So things are moving forward. Let me just say that to you, Rabbi. Everything is moving forward. We just got legislation passed just about a month ago, putting the very first FDA office into the region in the state of Israel, that's going to open up the FDA platform for manufacturing and being able to friendshore out of China. Things are on the move. There's a lot happening within the U.S.-Israel relationship, even in the midst of war and with all of this anti-Israel rhetoric. So we just have to put our heads down and continue to move forward and educate, educate, educate. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Wow, Heather, that's really encouraging words for us to hear, because again, everyone looks at this polling and everyone looks at what's going on in social media and is worried, is there going to be an end to this friendship between the U.S. and Israel? And one of the things I always default to is along the lines of what you're saying, but on the security side, when you go into the Pentagon, you go you talk to those types of people, they have a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of Israel and the U.S. at a security level. And that's not going to go away so easily just because someone gets elected who's saying the wrong things. Yes. Those relationships are not going to go away.
Yeah. And I think, too, we just don't want to go toward you don't want to abandon Israel while you're trying to carry out an Iran policy. You can walk and you can tap your head and chew gum at the same time. So important that we continue to honor the relationship to Israel while we're trying to build the Arab relationships. And you don't have to diss Israel while you're doing that. Very, very important that we keep the U.S.-Israel relationship very strong in the midst of trying to build these other collaborations. Hope that's clear.
Yeah. So Heather, in the Christian Zionist space, and unfortunately, this trend that I just talked about is affecting that space. When I go to these conferences from various Christian Zionist organizations, whether it's an Eagles Wings event or a Christians United for Israel event, or I attend I've attended many conferences. I spoke at a conference for the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, it's an aging crowd. That's the reality. Maybe that's just, that's who the activists are. But there's definitely concern about it. Even where there isn't a turn against Israel, a lot of the younger people just don't want to be involved in it. Yeah. Christian Zionism seems to be an artifact of their parents' and grandparents' generation. And as someone who's a professional fly on the wall in the Christian world, I've spoken to many churches, I've spoken to many Christian seminaries, lectured. What I have noticed for a long time, and this is nothing new to my audience, is that in academia, when you go into the seminaries, even from denominations where on the church level, they're very pro-Israel, they're doing trips to Israel. But when you go into the seminaries and you look at how theology is taught, and you look at how Christianity is taught, the framework of Christianity is taught, sometimes it's not called replacement theology, or it'll be called fulfillment theology, or it'll take, or covenant theology, or Israel will just not be. They don't even know that they believe in replacement theology. It's just Israel becomes kind of irrelevant, and I think that that's taking a toll. So a lot of the younger generation of pastors, I'll tell you, as a Jew, as a rabbi who goes to churches, a frequent pattern that I started noticing a few years ago was that the senior pastor of the church, who probably founded the church, might be in his 60s or 70s, has been to Israel a dozen times, and he's a big friend of Israel, and that's all fine and good. But then when I meet his staff and the younger guys on staff who recently graduated from evangelical seminaries will be much more standoffish. They're not so interested in the Israel thing. Are you at all, is your organization that's devoted to education looking towards the world of Christian academia at all and maybe seeing that as an opportunity to educate people beyond elected officials? Or are you staying in the lane of elected officials? And maybe you could comment also on the trend that I'm noticing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with every single word that you just said. No, I think it's just apparent. It is, it's appalling. And it feels a bit like we're being bamboozled by it, because in the midst of all of this war and the growing anti-Israel rhetoric, because we just keep staying at war. Now, I'm not opposed to the war. I think we have to prosecute everything to the fullest degree till we can get to diplomatic solutions if they're possible. But it has not been on our side. And this next generation is tired of watching people die. Nobody wants to watch somebody die. It doesn't. You don't distinguish between a Jew dying and a Palestinian dying. And people just can't do that. So that's the psyche. That's what we're dealing with. And when we get out of war and war abates, I think we may see this tide, rescind some. But to your point, we are absent an Israelology in most of our churches today. We're absent Israelology in most of the seminaries today. And I think that's where we are, we're messing up getting it to the next generation. Until we can have pastors that when we come to crises like this, they can stand up in their pulpit and accurately talk about the Abrahamic covenant. Very, very simple. Particular people who live in a particular land have been given the promises of God to bless the world. And until we can have pastors take their churches through that and give the understanding of modern Israel inside of the biblical prophecies as part of a new covenant theology. It's part of the new covenant. We're in the time frame of the new covenant, where God's writing the word into our hearts. That's what he said he would do. Until that happens, we are not transferring onto the next generation what we need to. And it is colossal. I feel like sometimes it's like we have a little dropper and there's this huge ocean and we're just trying to, do it all. I'm bending over backward where I am in the area of influence we have to begin to educate, to open up doors for that. We're writing curriculum on it. I think until we can get TPUSA, till we get some of the larger youth organizations really with an Israelology in it as part of their path forward, we're going to be hurting on that front, because I don't see churches picking this up, hoping that they will.
Yeah, I see it all the time. Pastors will go on a trip to Israel, and even if it has the right effect on them, let's say, especially when they go like with Robert Stearns and Eagle's Wings, he does a great job transforming these pastors into Christian Zionists. At the same time as they might buy what he's selling, so to speak, and they understand it, they don't necessarily feel confident in it because it's such a departure from the theological framework they've been operating with for so many years that they're not conversant in it. And it's exactly what you call it, Israelology. I never heard that word. I like it. But to understand how it fits into the framework, because admittedly, replacement theology is very easy. It's very simple. Like, church replaces Israel, then it's just everything's very clean. But God never promised us a clean, easy to understand theology. I mean, in fact, I think he even said, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. In other words, you're not going to quite get me, is what he was telling us. So that's okay. But being comfortable standing up, as you say, to stand up in the pulpit and present a confident Christian Zionist theology that doesn't compromise their Christian theology is something that a lot of pastors are struggling with. And they really need, for me as a Jew, as a rabbi, to express my view of the relationship from this side, even if I understand Christian theology, it doesn't do the same thing. We really need Christian leaders to infiltrate, and I say that in a positive connotation, the seminaries so that the Christian Zionist theology also gains more respect. A lot of young Christians view it as something this shallow, oh, it's just Genesis 12:3, you know,
Right.
bless the Jews.
Yeah.
They don't understand that it really is the biblical narrative.
It is. And there is absolutely no contradiction whatsoever. You know, God, and that's where that steady stream from we have one seamless Bible. Christians should see their Bibles seamlessly. We have an Old Testament that blends into a New Testament. It's seamless. And until we can really get that, then we're going to put a huge emphasis on just the New Testament, and we're going to fail to understand Israel's role, because Israel, the nation of Israel, has a role inside the new covenant timeframe. The prophecies are being fulfilled in our time. They are being fulfilled with the respect that God said, I'm going to beckon to the Gentiles to participate in it. I'm going to cause, 10 men from out of the nations. Where are the 10 men from out of the nations? Zechariah 8. They're going to seize a firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe, saying, let us come with you, for we can see and we have heard that God is with you. Well, these days are ahead of us. I believe that there will be more awakening in the Christian church around the world. I think we're going to see that, but it will be by God's initiative. There is no way, and I need to tell you, don't get discouraged, but there is no way for us to accomplish this just on our own. CUFI can't do it. Christians United for Israel, they're doing this full time. We can't seem to get it infiltrated, and that's not even the right word. We've had such a replacement theology so systemically for thousands of years, and we want to move that out and bring in that proper theology. It's an awakening, and God said it will be that. I will awaken the Gentiles. I'll beckon to them, and that's
Amen.
what he's going to do. It's what he has been doing.
Heather, final two questions. We can make them one question. I want to hear more about what is actually going on at the National Leadership Center in Ariel. You talk about 120,000 Israelis, including Jewish and Arab youth. What is the experience they're going through there? What is this institution? And secondly, uncommon favor. Tell us about that.
Well, we have just in the course of all of this relationship that we have with Israel, we worked with the Mayor Ron Nachman in the city of Ariel and Israel's Ministry of Education and the Defense Ministry to build a national leadership center on the mountains of Samaria. The focal point as we began that adventure back in 2010, was the notion of being able to create an experiential outdoor learning facility, state of the art, nothing like it in the state of Israel or in the Middle East, and be able to bring in the biblical heritage and identity. That is looking through the lens of Joshua and Caleb, Abraham, Moshe, and being able to take a secular Israel and being able to bring them into not a synagogue, but into experiential learning to work through problems together, team involvement, having to solve situations to get from A to B, but doing it through the lens of leadership out of the Bible, how those people connected with God, how they understood themselves as leaders, and then how they needed to relate to their team members, how they needed to relate to each other. And so that's really been the drumbeat. Very, very simple. We'll focus on life purpose. Why am I here? Why do I get up in the morning? And some of the ultimate and central and basic human questions. So that's what we've been doing. It's grown. We could not believe that how many people wanted to be a part of this, including the Arab Israeli high schools for which we have the contract. Our Jewish teams, because it's all Israeli led, are in 500 high schools in Israel. And we just opened a brand new campus in Jerusalem called the Jerusalem Leadership Institute, just above in Kerem, just below Yad Vashem. And we were given institute status by the IDF. And so we're doing a lot of the training for special forces in Israel with a focus on the biblical identity. And you can imagine, Rabbi, the importance and the growing importance inside of Israel today, inside this next generation, that they have a deep and inner conviction about why they're fighting, why they're staying in Israel, why not go to Singapore, why not leave this crazy country where we're always at war, and why we have to fight so hard. Well, if you don't know why you're fighting, why would you stay? So biblical identity is growing. That enormously important systemic root is growing inside the state of Israel today, and we're right at the forefront. We actually helped to get it started.
So is there a website people can go to if they want to learn more about that project?
Yeah, sure. jhisrael.com. Mm-hmm.
jhisrael.com. That's awesome. Okay.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Uncommon Favor.
Uncommon Favor is just a book I wrote about our journey. It's been a faith journey to step into the story of Israel. It has a big focus on that sense of a rabbi and Talmud relationship, the importance of closeness with God in one's personal journey, which then becomes he as the source of our identity. He's the giver of our identity. To be a stranger to him is to be a stranger to yourself. So we really, really espouse a very intimate and close, real, and a relationship with him that is not imagined, that it has a lot of chutzpah to it, and that is on the advance in one's personal life. Well, the story is about that, and it interweaves our stories related to Israel, which have been nothing short of miraculous. And so it's a great, great book to read and be inspired by.
And I see it's available on Amazon, so you guys could look that up. Uncommon Favor by Heather Johnston. All right, Heather, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you on behalf of the Jewish people. As I'm sitting here in Israel, I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing. This is such important work. It doesn't get a lot of headlines. You're not having massive conferences that people see your name and your brand everywhere. No. But what you're doing is just essential to the health of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and what you're doing for the young people here in Israel with the center. It's just, it's inspiring to listen to you. Thank you so much again for being on Shoulder to Shoulder.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I appreciate it. Enjoyed being with you.
And thank you to all of you for listening to Shoulder. Please make sure that you're subscribed, that you like, that you give us a good rating. And make sure that you click the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube, and click some of the links in there, and make sure that you're connected to all the work that we're doing, all the work of Israel 365 and the Israel Truth Network. And tell others about this podcast. And we'll see you next week on Shoulder to Shoulder.